received.
Yeah, I thought I knew about those. Well, we have 3 councillors, 3 or 4 councillors, so we may even be quorate.
Yeah, we are. No, we are quorate.
That's what I like
Myself
to
and
hear.
3 others are what we need.
Okay,
Yeah.
well, I'm going to start because, as I say, I want to. There's a lot to do and a lot of interesting stuff and substantive work. So, the more we can get cracking, the better. So, have we done the apologies? I think you've mentioned them, so we're probably okay with that now. Any declaration of interest? I can't imagine there's any of those. Been asked to welcome new board members, and this is great to have the new board members come in. Excuse me. Mark Liddith from the Environmental Agency, I can see you there, and Matthew Rhodes can't come from Energy Capital because he's apologised. And is Cheryl on here?
No, she wasn't able to join us today. So Energy Capital have sent apologies, but they will be at the next meeting.
Okay, all right then. So minutes from the last meeting. Has anyone got any observations? Jackie, just and Dan, keep your eye on the screen. I'm sort of, my preference is if someone wants to speak, to put their hand somewhere obvious near the, because it's quite difficult looking at papers, looking at the screen at the same time. So that's my start. So good morning, Catherine.
Morning.
Okay, so no comments on the minutes. So I think the first item, which is extremely important actually, is I'm going to ask Jackie to introduce. It's the WSP program. So can you take over, Jackie?
Yes, sure. So I'm just going to share one slide to give us some context for the next item on the agenda. But I think for a number of the elements that we're going to be talking about today. So I'm hoping that everybody can see this particular graphic on my screen. So just as a reminder, we're working with a program that has been developing over time. So we had the ball paper that went to the Combined Authority Board in January, which developed the strategy for our net zero ambitions. And then we followed that up reviewing the consultation that developed that paper, as well as thinking about some of the elements that we could pull out quickly that would support the recovery from COVID-19, or certainly things that we should be thinking about alongside COVID-19. And we've split that into 5 different sections, and you'll hear more about the natural capital section today because we've decided to focus on some of the work in relation to natural capital and access to green space in the meeting today. But also thinking about some of the different elements that are important for delivering our net zero ambitions, but also have co-benefits that can support the recovery from COVID. So social outcomes and economic outcomes, particularly around jobs and skills. So, for example, there is work happening by Energy Capital looking at retrofits and also the energy transition. And Cheryl came and spoke at the last board meeting around some of that work. The Combined Authority is working on a zero carbon homes route map. There's work happening in terms of active travel and also around the circular economy. So there's quite a breadth of work happening in relation to this programme. And we're also working very closely with colleagues in local authorities. So we have a low carbon officers group. And we bring officers together to talk about some of these issues because we're also aware that there's a lot happening in the local authorities as well, and that local authorities are all working towards their own carbon targets too. So we're trying to develop collaboratively, working alongside that activity in the different authorities. But also thinking in the medium to longer term around what delivering on 2041 might look like. And you'll hear, I won't spend too much on this part of the slide, because you're going to hear from WSP in a minute around the 5-year plan work. But looking at how we break down that 2041 target into 4 5-year plans that have a distinct carbon budget, and where we're clear on the programs that need to be developed, and the carbon savings that we could expect from those, and the level of investment that will be needed. So that will be a really important next step to take us from an idea of where we need to go in terms of net zero, but actually then how we do it and the delivery mechanisms that we're going to need in place to get us there. And so that's another important piece of work that we're doing in conjunction with the local authorities. As Councillor Courts has mentioned, this is quite a packed agenda, and if there is anything that you hear about today that you would like more information on, then we're happy to provide that or set up conversations. And as I mentioned, we have our low carbon officers group that meets every 6 weeks, and so we're working with all of you. But if there is something that you would like to hear more about, then please do let us know. And I think it's also important to say that we're working across the combined authority, acknowledging that there are other strategies and programmes that are happening alongside this. So, for example, the refresh of the Movement for Growth strategy. So we're working closely with Transport for West Midlands, for example, to make sure that these programmes are aligned and are working together. So I think that's probably all I need to say by way of introduction, just to provide some context. I see Councillor Zafar has his hand up, though.
Two points. I was going to bring in Councillor Zafar, but just a couple of points on, you're involved, what you're doing with individual local authorities. It would be very good for everybody, actually, if we could find a system of reading out, have a readout of what's going on, and this is important for a couple of reasons. One is the whole business of exemplars, and secondly, well, that fundamentally is the role of a key role of the CA, which is coordination and bringing people together. But also thirdly, it matters. I mean, we've got Catherine on later on to talk about the national park, and if ever there was a need to sort of get a cross-regional view of things, that is one example. So the more we can do that, the better. And the second real point is I'm very keen on metrics, because on measuring stuff, and I'll never be satisfied until I am satisfied as to how we measure the different actions that are being taken to ensure that what we spend our money and time on is the most effective. But Councillor Zafar, you've got your hand up.
Thank you, Chair, and Jackie. Thank you for the brief presentation. And Jackie, thank you for attending yesterday's climate change task force meeting in Birmingham. Apologies, I'm keeping my camera off because I'm having internet problems. Thank you, Jackie, for attending yesterday and the contribution you made. I think what was quite clear in terms of where Birmingham is, where we've got to increase the pace of how we're working. We had an update to full council last month, and where council requested a fully costed action plan by the end of the year. And what Jackie was quite clear yesterday is there needs to be more coordination between the different partners in Birmingham. And I'm particularly keen to, in the next, say, couple of weeks, to have an offline conversation with you around the areas of the work that the combined authority are leading on, how we can put them into our plan, and also the conversations that you're having with partners regionally and the input they're having in Birmingham to ensure there's not a duplication of work taking place, and two, probably more importantly, we've got the right expertise leading on the right areas within Birmingham. So it's not the local authorities that are leading it, but it's the local authorities that facilitate and enabling expertise across the city and region to drive this very, very important agenda in the, at the pace that we absolutely need it at. So I just want to say thank you, and I'll be really keen for a conversation over the next couple of weeks to tie all this together for Birmingham, please.
Yeah, I'm more than happy to do that. And as we're doing the work with WSP, and they'll talk more about the work that they're doing, they've already had an initial conversation with colleagues in Birmingham, Councillor Zafar, and one of the things that we are trying to understand is actually what makes sense to deliver at which level. So this kind of principle of subsidiarity. So where is it that as a combined authority we can add the most to this agenda? What makes sense for local authorities to do, given that there's a lot of work already happening? So absolutely happy to catch up with you on that. So we'll sort that.
Councillor Zafra, I wouldn't mind joining in that if you don't mind, because it's so critical, and frankly, Birmingham, Solihull have always worked. I see Andy Makovich is on the line. We work very closely on a number of these things, so the more liaison, the better. If that's okay.
That's absolutely fine, Chair. That'd be most welcome. Thank you.
One of us, Councillor Fowler, hand up.
Yes, good morning, Ian. Thank you, Chair. Yes, as Wazim said, and Jacqueline will recall, that was on the duplication. That was exactly what I said yesterday. I was hearing from so many different quarters, and likewise from the combined authority, that there's so many different things going on in so many different areas. There was this danger of a bit of silo mentality, and I was concerned that there may be, in fact, I'm pretty sure that there probably is somewhat of duplication. And exactly what I said, if Wazim will recall, we need to bring this all together, so we're singing virtually from the same hymn sheet. So, Ian, I very much support what you said, and that's exactly what I said yesterday at the Route to Zero meeting. Thank you.
Great stuff. Great stuff. Okay, no more hands up, I see. So it's back to you, Jackie. Are you going to introduce WSP, is it?
Yes, so we have a few colleagues from WSP. So if I can hand over to them to take us through an overview of the 5-year plan and the work that they're going to be doing. Have you got slides, Sab, to share?
I think Barney is sharing. Barney,
Okay.
do you want to?
Yeah, I'm going to try it. So I'm going to say hello first, and then I'll. So good morning, everybody. My name's Barney Evanson from WSP, and I'm managing this project to deliver your 5-year plan. I've got some colleagues on the call with me from our energy and carbon specialists, stakeholder engagement, and our economic specialists on the call. Why don't you very briefly introduce yourselves? If we start with Eve, then Josh, then Sab, then Jim.
Good morning, everybody. My name's Eve Peverley. I'm working with you on the stakeholder engagement side. So, thank you.
Hi, I'm Josh Simmons. I'm working on the jobs and skilled aspect of the strategy, and I'll be working closely with Jim, who's my colleague.
Hi, Sabir, and I'll be working on the energy and carbon modelling mainly.
I'm Jim Coleman. I'm Head of Economics at WSP, and I'll be leading all of the aspects of the plan around job creation and skills development.
Okay, so thanks, Jen. Thank you, Jen. What I'll do is I'll spend about 10 minutes just introducing everything to you, what we're doing. Hopefully you can see my screen now. If someone could nod, that they can. That's perfect. Thank you. So I'll give you 10 minutes, and then we're pretty much open to Q&A. If you really want to, obviously interrupt me as I go along, but this won't take too long. So
I think the presentation has actually gone round, hasn't it, Jackie? Has this?
Yes,
gone round?
yes.
It has
So
gone round.
people have had the slides along with the papers. Yeah.
it has. I've actually slightly tweaked this, so this is a new improved version. So you'll be slightly different, but not massively. Okay, so I'm going to skip that. So I think the first thing to say is you're aware of the WM 2041 paper strategy that sets out the requirement for us to be net zero by 2041, or that sets the target for the region to be net zero by 2041, which is what we're working on. A strong piece of that work is to ensure that we don't forget these 5 principles that guide that. So there's this requirement to change our economy without leaving anyone behind, invest in the resilience of our places, use our industrial past to create a new future, which is sort of taking into account the West Midlands particularities, creating place and connections that help us to meet the climate change, and of course decoupling prosperity from the consumption of energy and resources. So it's very important that, because I think for people like me who do a lot in the decarbonisation world, it's easy to sometimes draw the route to get there. It's important to remember there's a much bigger picture behind that. So our work is I suppose what we're trying to do is work with what we're already doing. So we're mapping what you're already doing, and I think some of the comments that have been made by some of the councillors already emphasise this point. It's good that we capture what you're already doing and map that, but then also develop that plan across the region on how we get to that net zero. And I'll come on to some of the details on that. There's a big stakeholder engagement piece, of course, of which in a sense this is a part. And I'll just show you I've added a quick slide to show you how we're doing that in a moment. And then emphasising that point, going back to those 5 principles as well, is we can tell you how to get to zero carbon. We can definitely do that. We're very experienced and skilled at doing that. But of course, that's the theory. We need to work out the routes to delivery, which also responds to some of the comments that have been made earlier about who is that organisation, who's those people, what's the commercial structure, what's the legal structure, and some of that bluntly won't be all deliverable within the region, because you are going to rely on external, either national government perhaps or private organisations to work with on that. And then there's the funding sources of financing. I think in the WM 2041 report, it gives a figure of 40 billion, I think I'm right in saying, which I suppose in easy maths would be £2 billion a year you need to invest. But what I think, I mean, that is a very high level figure, and we're going to improve on that for sure. But I think what that hides is some of this stuff will happen for free. So to give you an example, the electric vehicle revolution we're going to go through, some of that will not incur any costs to the region, because people will just buy electric cars because they're better, cheaper, faster, etc. Some things like wind and solar perhaps can be delivered by the private sector, and then, so again, at no cost because they'll be commercially viable. And then some other things won't be. So to give an example of one that's always tricky, it's the domestic retrofit sector. It is always difficult for a host of commercial and legal reasons. So we're very much focused on that, and that's why we've got Jim's expertise will be so fantastically important for this. So I'll go through the priority areas here. We've got the interventions, that delivery, jobs, skills, and then resources and finance. So I wanted to stop briefly on the stakeholder engagement and just illustrate how we're approaching this. So I don't normally put this in, but and I appreciate you don't need to read this too much, but essentially what we're doing is we're creating a long list. We have created a long list, a pretty final list now of who we want to talk to, and then who that person is, where they are in that organisation, what their contact details are, and then just how we're going to engage them. Because in some groups we're engaging them collectively, in some engagements we'll go in one-to-one, and in some we're using questionnaires and so on. So it's very much horses for courses, but we think we're capturing everything appropriately. But welcome to feedback. So just to excuse me, okay. So excuse the wrong pasting in here. The energy and carbon interventions we've broken them down into 7 sectors, and this is not this is not the set down in stone or anything. It's just the way we approach things. You could do it slightly differently. So the domestic sector, crucial, of course, a very large part, and as I said, can be challenging because it's what routes you use. There's the commercial sector, which would be retail, offices, maybe even light industry. And then there's industrial, by which we mean generally heavy industry. So typically I would say things that uses a lot of power or a lot of heat is what we're looking at there. And then there's the transport sector, which is always the single largest source of greenhouse gas emissions. And of course, the combined authority has a big role in that, but it works at all levels. So you're talking about active travel as well as public transport and so on. There's a strategic land use perspective, which is important, and I think it'll get more complicated, but in simple terms we're talking about wind power, we're talking about solar power, and we're talking about what we call afforestation or net biomass. So for example, the national park that I think you're going to talk about after us would be irrelevant for that. So capture, so the trees, plants capture carbon dioxide from the air, so they're options. But strategic land use. There's an indirect piece, so how do we approach offsetting? And I think there's a parallel piece of work going on around offsetting, because offsetting has political and practical implications. And then finally, some expertise we bring is around system management. So when you electrify all your transport and heat and so on, you need to think about how that system works, because of course there's a whole infrastructure that underlies that. So on the delivery, just to, I've sort of hinted at it already, but on the delivery, we're identifying the best routes for delivery, and that's, like I said, that's organisations, but it's commercial structures, trying to not reinvent the wheel, so using existing structures where we can, talking to key stakeholders. And then on the jobs and skills front, I think probably I would say, I would expect the West Midlands will be more affected by this 20-year transition than most regions because of the manufacturing and motor sectors, as examples particularly. They're going to go through a rapid transition, and so we're engaging with the further education, higher education providers, employers and so on, to see what skills and employment strategies are needed to ensure that the region can benefit from that, but also those people who are affected from it can make the transition to different roles. And the resources and finance, yeah, as I said, understanding the resources needed and how this can be met. As I said before, there's a number, which is how much things cost, but actually almost as important is where that money comes from. So it's not just because it won't all come from one place, and some of it will come naturally and some won't. So, okay, I think that's long enough for me. I hope that was giving you a good introduction to what we're doing. I'm completely open to take questions and answers. Is that the best way to do this, Councillor Court?
Yeah, I think so. I've got a question for you, because I like the 7 sectors. I mean, it comes back to what I said earlier about what gives us a most bang for the buck or whatever. Mm-hmm. But one thing that I've learned, this year with the COVID thing, is that the power of communications and the power to belittle important issues in the COVID Kents about arguing about rules instead of common sense so often comes up. And it's the same in the environmental sector, that people action and behaviour is going to be the most important, yet you don't have that as one of your 7. I know it's cross-cutting, but it's one of the most important of all for people and for business. Comments, please.
Yeah, so I'll try and take that. Yeah, so I'll make a note of that, and it's a good point. It's certainly it is in there. I'd say, to be slightly defensive, it is in there, and things like active travel is people's behaviour and working out how to help them make decisions that help that. I think I'd be slightly contradictory. Some of the stuff doesn't involve people at all. So offshore wind and onshore wind and solar, for example, doesn't really engage with people, but some of it hugely does. So certainly the electric vehicle revolution and the change into our heating systems over the next 10, 20 years is hugely personal in a way that the transition hasn't been at the moment. And we'll take that on board. I think we have got experience, and we are looking at drawing on experience of what's happened in the past and how people have responded to things like the Green Deal and so on. So we are taking it on board.
Okay, accepted, and I'll wait to see. But I think one of the most important things is looking at barriers. And if you mentioned EV vehicles, and I've bought an EV vehicle, and what are the barriers to it? Well, obviously in that case, one of the key ones is range anxiety. And it's back to the old thing. Simple things put people off, and we need to overcome them. I've now got Maria Crompton with a hand up.
Thank you, Ian. I just, I want to agree with you. As far as people are concerned, it's the message that we get across that makes all the difference, and how we get the message across, and that the message is consistent from right across the board, from government to the West Midlands Combined Authority to all the different regions. And if we can get that right, then we can bring people with us. Otherwise, it won't happen.
Thank you. Yeah, that's great. Okay, anyone else? I've got no one else with their hand up, which is quite surprising. But okay. Well, in the interest of keeping on time,
Ian.
Yeah.
My hand up.
Andy, yeah. Sorry, I can't. Yeah. Okay.
Okay. Yeah. It's a good presentation, and I first would like to agree. It's about people making the right choices. And there is a behavioural aspect to this, in that, do I need to have that extra bit of packaging? Can I put commercial pressure on my suppliers to reduce their carbon input? The other thing that we need to look at is carbon insetting. which is basically making sure the supply chain has a low carbon impact. So we make decisions whether we buy locally or we buy or import things, because importing has a higher carbon impact. So that's the choice. That needs to be a factor. But the most important factor to reach carbon zero is utilities need to be carbon zero. And I was pleased to hear that Severn Trent are going to be carbon zero by 2030 in the supply of water. But it's fundamentally important that our power is carbon free. And if that happens, which is we're well on the way, it does mean that we will be able to do a lot more things, and therefore that will decouple economic growth from the need to burn fuel to power the economic growth. So I think that's the fundamental background. But people making the right choices has a massive effect. So that's, thank you.
Okay. I thought that was an interesting point you made about local business, Andy.
Yeah.
And it's one of the things, I mean, locally, as you know, in Solihull, we are trying to, promote local business. And I just wonder, again, it's a messaging bit, but, I bought some blueberries the other day. I have a weakness for fruit and stuff. And when my wife pointed out to me that they'd come from Peru, I've felt thoroughly ashamed. I know we don't grow blueberries in this country, but we grow other stuff. That's a sort of behavioural change. The massive import. People in Britain just buy stuff without thinking, about the consequences. Ed Cox.
Thank you, Councillor Courts. Yes, I just wanted to pick up on 2 points that have been made. First of all, it's quite interesting the way in which many of us, and I do this myself, begin our sentences by saying the most important thing in relation to climate change is. And I think the importance of the work the WSP are doing for us is that they will give us a categorical answer as to what the most important thing might be, at least for the combined authority, in terms of, and I would put it in the terms that you, Councillor Courts, often use, which is the biggest bang for our buck. And so that I hope that this work will, if you like, give us a fairly categorical answer as to what the most important thing is that we need to do, and so that we can answer that as a combined authority. The second point is just on the conversations that we've been having about behaviour change, which, as Barney and the team have said, will be part of the WSP considerations, but also to say, given we know the importance of this, and we know that the role that the combined authority and the mayor indeed have in relation to encouraging behaviour change, is that we are commissioning some specific work to get some really careful guidance on how we approach behaviour change from a combined authority and local authority perspective. So I'm wondering whether we might actually bring a little report on that to the next board meeting, so that you can understand a little bit more about the approach that we're planning to adopt. But as I say, the simple thing to say is that will be aligned with the work that WSP are doing. This 5-year plan is absolutely critical to determining the priorities for this board and for the combined authority in the years ahead.
Yeah.
Okay. Certainly, I welcome that. Just in terms of, I can't see everyone on my screen. I can see the participants here, so I'm going to be more successful with an electronic hand, I think, than the one I hope, which is waving at me. But
Barney, it may be worth just dropping your screen now, if that's okay.
Right. Okay. Can we drop the questions thing if we're not using it?
Yes. Sorry. Absolutely. Dan.
Okay. Could I suggest, Ed, that for next, I would like that behavioural thing. Could we have a linkage with the comms issue? I'm very keen we start drip feeding out good stuff, which is being done. And, there's an appetite for collaboration on all this, and an appetite for telling people that I think we all have roles here to do. So if we could have a think about how we make that practical. Right, I've got no more speakers on this. So
Councillor Courts, just to say, I don't think it's on the agenda, but it may be worth just flagging the fact that we have very recently produced a 5 tips thing. It was linked to the, Jackie help me, the International Week for, no, the
Zero Emissions Day.
Zero Emissions Day, we published 5 tips that went out on social media and so on as a kind of first step and nudge into that behaviour change agenda.
Did that link with our social media in Solihull, for example, and anyone else, or was it?
Again, that's where I think we need to get more joined up. So I'm not sure whether that happened or didn't happen, whether your officers in Solihull picked it up or not, I don't know. But again, that's where we need a more strategic approach to behaviour change, which is where we're getting some expert advice around that.
Okay.
So there has previously been a comms group set up, and I think it was largely around the consultation process for WM 2041, but to look specifically at climate change issues. So we'll make sure that that is still being coordinated and that we're able to get some collaboration. The other thing that we've signed up to is an initiative called Count Us In, which is an international initiative and is something that you would be able to push out through social media as well. So we could bring that up with comms colleagues, which is where people are able to sign up to make a pledge around one of the top 16 things they can do to have an impact, a personal impact on climate change. So I will also circulate some more information about that Count Us In initiative as well.
Okay, so the media plan will deal with, obviously there's individual messaging, but it's a conduit for media as well to make sure we pick up the individual local authorities, what they want to do with it, and then the individual sources, because we push out a lot from the CA. I've not seen that much on environment, and often I think the best thing is to link it with other subjects. Because people sort of, environment should be cross-cutting, should be a green golden thread, as opposed to, suddenly whizzo idea on CO2 or whatever. Okay, I think I'm no more hands, so I'm inclined to move on. That's great, provocative stuff. Thank you. A great start to today's meeting, and I'll be interested to see the outputs from WSP. The whole team as we move forward. So I'm going to move on to it's item 6 on the agenda, which is natural capital, which is a big topic in itself, and one, well, some of us are massively interested in. I think that we've got 3 items. I'm going to hand over to Jackie. But can I just drop in something, Chairman's privilege, you could say, in terms of the natural world is something I'm very, very keen on. In the last couple of weeks, we have put to our council, the draft, pre-submission draft of the local plan. But one of our themes is about the role of natural capital, actually green infrastructure in development, because I'm from the building industry, so I know we have to develop, we have to meet housing needs. It's how you do that and the role of green infrastructure, which some people believe in and others don't. I personally think we need to do it. We need to have it as critical. So I'm very interested in seeing how that works. It links very neatly also with Catherine Moore's work on National Park later on. So I'm handing over to you, Jackie, before I interrupt any more.
Thank you. So we are doing a number of different pieces of work around natural capital. And so we have produced a single paper for this item that brings together 3 of the projects that we've been working on or with in the case of the West Midlands National Park. And I think we've seen in the recovery and during COVID-19 the value that people have been putting on green space. And I think there's been a number of studies looking at this. So the RSPB have done a really interesting study looking at the value that people have put on green space, and that there hasn't been equality of access to that green space. And the New Economics Foundation have also produced some work looking at that at a national level. And we were interested to understand what the access to green space looked like across the West Midlands, and then how we might begin to redress that through a scheme of community green grants, for example, that we put into the comprehensive spending review ask. And we're working with other organisations that are also showing an interest in this space. So the National Trust, the RSPB are very keen to pick that up with us, and DEFRA also have shown a particular interest in that piece of work. So colleagues from the New Economics Foundation will talk about that bit of work. Birmingham City University have been doing some work on a West Midlands National Park and what that might look like across the region, and how we might start to take that from what is a great vision into delivery of particular projects that start to increase the opportunity for access to both blue and green infrastructure, but also looking at some of the industrial heritage across the region and how we increase access. And we've also, as part of WM 2041, had a tree planting target, so to plant 4 million trees. And we've previously touched on the potential for the CA to act in a convening role. And we've established what we're calling the virtual forest platform, which is looking to convene different tree planting groups and initiatives to try and scale the efforts that are already going into that, and to share knowledge and opportunities around tree planting to help us reach that target. So the first on the agenda is the New Economics Foundation piece of work, and I see Alex Chapman has joined us now from the New Economics Foundation. So I'll hand over to Alex to describe the work that they've done. There is a draft report which has been circulated to officers in your local authorities already, and we will send out after this meeting for comments to all of you. But we've invited Alex along to provide an overview of that piece of work that they've done, and to give the context for that. So Alex, shall I hand over to you?
Sure. Hi everyone. I'm just going to try and share my screen, if that's okay. Okay, have you got full screen presentation now?
Yeah.
Cool. So I'm going to do something which is probably really unadvisable in this situation. I'm going to present some new data that I crunched in like the last 24 hours and isn't actually in the report that we've just submitted, which would seem completely crazy, but if it weren't for the fact that I thought it was so pertinent and it only just been released by Natural England. So just to set the scene, this is some new data from Natural England's People and Nature Survey, new survey, national indicator survey that launched this year, and obviously it launched in a pretty crazy time. So its first wave of data collection runs from April to June 2020, the 3 months probably peak crisis. I just wanted to draw out a few bits of early analysis. I mean, there'll be lots more coming out from it, but this is quite high level stuff that I just wanted to point out. This is the proportion of people who were reporting that they had made no visits to green and natural spaces in the 14 days prior to being surveyed. And you see here the West Midlands reporting, and obviously this is the West Midlands wider region as opposed to the combined authority, so it's cheating a little bit, but at some point we'll hopefully be able to get data as granular as the local authorities in your area. But showing here that the proportion is highest of all of England's regions of people who haven't visited green and natural spaces. A little bit of data in there as well why that might be the case. So this is level of agreement with the sentence, my local green and natural spaces are within easy walking distance. You see West Midlands, not the worst performing on this indicator, but among the worst of the regions in terms of people seeing their local green spaces as being easily accessible. And in the same kind of a vein, so my computer is responding so slowly to changing slides. This is level of agreement with people's the statement around the standard of green space. So my local green and natural spaces are high enough standard to want to spend time in. And here you see the West Midlands performing the worst in terms of agreement of the population that their green spaces are of a good standard. So two kind of just indicates as to why maybe the actual usage rate is so low, but there's a huge number of factors that actually could be driving that, especially in the middle of a crisis. Parking the kind of sort of physical characteristics of spaces in the West Midlands, I wanted to briefly look at social issues. This is just general across the data set, but here seeing that on the left, visits by ethnicity, or no visits, sorry, by ethnicity, the proportion of white British people who had made no visits, a bit lower than the proportion of ethnic minorities, which obviously could be a contributing factor in the West Midlands where there's a high proportion of ethnic minority groups. And then over here on the right, the same graph but by household income, again showing that the proportion making no visits to the natural environment much higher, much higher in the lowest income groups. And obviously you all represent areas with particularly high rates of people with low incomes. Just some kind of indicators as to what might be driving these figures, probably more data to come from that, but just kind of sets up the rest of this presentation, hopefully, what I'm going to report and what we've been doing for the Combined Authority. So we kind of just come to the end now of what I'm calling a scoping study. It was small and more about demonstrating how we might go about doing something than answering all of the questions, although hopefully the data we produce does have the power to answer some useful questions. We've brought together the evidence which links green space, well-being and inequality, of course particularly pertinent right now with this now getting a quite extended period of lockdown and things, mental health issues really rising, and lots of data that links the quality of green space, provision of green space to people's mental health as something that can either hold them up during a tough period like this or can be a compounding factor. We've then tried to design a framework for what I'm calling the intersectional links between green space, well-being and inequality. I'll come back to that in the next slide. We've then tried to map those intersections across the West Midlands Combined Authorities. We've had lots of calls with different officers across your councils talking about this and about the mapping that you've already done in your areas. And part of what we're trying to do is to get a homogenous approach across the whole region, so we can make comparisons, we can understand cross-border issues, and just try to maybe bring a little bit more of a kind of social inequity lens to it as well, because often council green space kind of strategies focus quite a lot on provision, but not necessarily on the kind of social inequity of that provision. We then have done a bit of reviewing of different interventions that might address those different kind of cross sections of society and where the different inequalities lie, with a view to then supporting the Combined Authority, hopefully at a later date with this, to set up a kind of targeting system where the authorities can work together to understand where is there a particular issue, what type of issue are we expected to see in that area, is it related to poverty, is it related to ethnicity, is it related to health deprivation or caring responsibilities, where are the kind of pinch points where that links in to the provision of green space. So to try and help us kind of understand this, we've built this kind of framework, if you like, for looking at what I'm calling the kind of intersections between where green space issues interlink with social issues. So on the left, I've got drawn out some kind of key social demographic characteristics of the present moment and where ones that are particularly relevant to inequity in society today, relating to things like general deprivation, but also health, education, caring responsibilities. On the left, we haven't been able to analyse all of those in this project. All of the green cells on this figure are all the bits that we couldn't do, and probably looking at us thinking that we didn't offer very good value for money because we did a lot we did a lot fewer of the cells, but that's just because it's such a big, wide range of things with so many complicated data sources. We really wanted to kind of just demonstrate the potential for honing in on some of these cross sections where the social issue meets these different aspects of physical barriers. So looking across the top, things like how much population pressure there is on a green space and how close or how accessible it is in distance wise or route connections, what quality is perceived, the amenity value it has. Does it serve children? Does it serve elderly people? Does it have an appeal to an ethnic minority group or people with disabilities? And we finally added on the end a slightly different one, this idea of greenness. This is more a general point about less about maybe parks and open spaces and more about just highlighting that there is a component which links critically to kind of people's well-being in the urban environment, particularly around generally how green they perceive their area to be. And that might not be about parks, it could be about street trees, it could be about, you know, anything from green roofs to, you know, just small bits of incidental green space that you see alongside a road. And we've touched a bit on those, but the actual deeper analysis we've done focuses on these three areas where socioeconomic deprivation meets population pressure and proximity, as well as age and ethnicity with the same parameters. So it's kind of demonstrate the potential of how you might use this type of a framework to look at the kind of issues that might be driving some of the green space outcomes in the West Midlands. We've built a few maps. The first was just to try and map and understand what green space looks like across the West Midlands, and I focus on particular authorities in these maps, but that's not to pick on those authorities. It's more just a demonstrator of what we did across the whole area. Here, this map just shows in the kind of dark green hatched designation what might be considered the kind of officially recognised bits of green space. And then in the light green area, we've tried to categorise the green spaces that are there, but maybe don't have an official categorisation, but might be perceived by local people as being green. They might not necessarily have full access to that area, but they might be walking past it on their way to work, or they might, you know, they might have awareness that it's there. So that typically relates to, you know, things like, you know, paths that just happen to have a bit of green space next to it, roads that have a bit of green space in the middle, maybe. Versus the kind of like centerpiece parks that people will go make a trip to. And this is obviously to understand, you know, the kind of official classification of green space can sometimes be a bit limited and can actually maybe paint a worse picture than is appropriate. But there's also questions about this incidental green space, this light green stuff, about whether it's really performing to its maximum potential in supporting communities. You know, are there kind of left behind bits of space that might do more for local communities? So once we've got an understanding on that, we then tried to look at a bit more about what might be perceived by local people. Now picking on Sandwell here. Here all we've done is just taken all the postcodes in the Sandwell area and looked at their distance from a piece of green space, whether that be officially classified green space or incidental green space, just to try and get an idea of where the pockets within the authority are that somebody might not perceive a particularly green environment. Typically across West Midlands, and I'm really generalising here, we're talking about areas where usually terraced, sort of older generation housing is heavily present. These are areas where there tends to be quite dense areas without much even incidental kind of bits of green in there. So here this is just using a kind of, are you 5 minutes walk away from something that might be considered a bit green? It's a very crude measure, but it's just demonstrating the potential of what we might be able to do across the authority. And says something about the kind of daily lived experience of people within some of these pockets of the authority. And we recognise it's very crude here. We're making assumptions from a top-down approach, and I would say in terms of everything that we're presenting here, it needs to be, you know, just taken as though this is a way of figuring out where there might be an issue we might want to look into more. Then there's going to need to be a deeper assessment on that area to see whether that issue is real, whether it's perceived by local people, and what the nuances of that issue are. So then we move over to this kind of more sort of structured maps, which are all based around the lowest level of it's called lower super output area kind of categorization of local areas. So here looking at Coventry, and now comparing the index of multiple deprivation with our own index for population pressure on green spaces. So on the left, you have Coventry's index of multiple deprivation. You see the red patches where there's high levels of deprivation. And on the right, we've then scaled that by population pressure on green spaces. So areas with high deprivation and high population pressure will still show up as very red, but areas with high deprivation but low population pressure on green spaces won't show up as deep red. So really, actually, all this shows is that the two things go hand in hand, and generally across the combined authority, deprived areas have a lot of population pressure on their local green space. So that just kind of flags a fairly obvious point about what can we do to alleviate that pressure, and also to consider within a pandemic context when people don't want to be up in each other's faces, is there something we can do in the local green areas to try and make these heavily pressured green spaces a bit more accessible? Because I think this feature here, I think it's potentially one of the major drivers of why the national statistics are showing deprived areas as having much lower use of green space during the pandemic, or a bigger fall in use of green space during the pandemic, because they're put off by the pressure that's on the green space and feelings of discomfort using those spaces. So again, just giving a flavour of a couple of the other indices that we looked at. Here I've matched up the index of proximity to green space, how far away you are from green space, with an index of population under the age of 18. So now we're flagging areas in red, which is a much less kind of structured way of looking at the map. It's all quite dotted around because it varies by local populations, but we're finding places where there's a very large young population and they're a long way from any green spaces. So that's another thing that we might want to look in on one of these local areas and say, right, well, we know here that there's a particular problem around age and proximity. What can we do to address that? It might not necessarily be creating a new green space. It might be about building pathways or linkages to green spaces that are already in existence. And again, just a complete different lens on how you might target a certain class or type of intervention in a local area. And then we can do the same thing here for the opposite. So this is looking at people over the age of 65. Obviously much less of an issue in a lot of the authorities in this area, because generally quite young populations compared to the national sort of picture. But nonetheless, we might want to focus in on some populations, typically around the peripheries of the local authorities, where there's quite old populations, but they're not within a good proximity of green space. Again, what's appropriate in that area? Maybe it's a new local garden, maybe it's a bus that takes people to green spaces. I don't know, but this is the kind of questions that this type of analysis might flag, might open up for any projects that we have moving forward. Final one before I stop rambling is about ethnic minorities. Again, the data here is sort of somewhat predictable in the sense that, broadly speaking, ethnic minorities do link up with more deprived areas. More deprived areas link up with areas that have high population pressure on green spaces. Those three things are all quite, robustly linked. Not always, but generally are. So, exactly how much information this figure shows, I don't know. I mean, depends on the local, on looking in at the local area in the local context. But sometimes there might be some counterintuitive kind of narratives that this can show. Here, maybe we might want to consider how we approach the problem differently when it's an ethnic minority community. And how a different type of intervention about making a green space more welcoming to them could be approached slightly differently from where it might be a different type of population or different community. And we can do the same looking at ethnic minority populations and their proximity to green space, which again shows a slightly different picture, not radically different from the last one, but now instead of talking about population pressure on green space, we're talking about how far people are away from green space. And we still see some pockets where there's quite strong or large ethnic minority communities who don't have good provision of green space, and that relationship is pretty tight across the authority, which again probably isn't a revolutionary finding, but is useful to reflect on. And hopefully these maps also, working with council officers carefully, can help to sort of zoom in on local areas and understand those issues a bit better, and work with the combined authority on any potential programs to kind of address these issues on a short-term basis through the crisis, and then potentially on longer term in terms of building a greener society and moving towards addressing issues related to climate change and others as well. So yeah, that's a whistle-stop tour of the work that we've done. I'll stop rambling. Take any questions if anyone's got any.
I just want to make a couple of comments here. I mean, when I first started work as a lawyer, I was it was made very clear to me by my gruff Yorkshire boss that I was no use to him unless I didn't just identify problems but found solutions. And to my mind, in this case, you've identified quite a number of issues, but and some of the issues that people raised on the basis of how they feel. I mean, North Solihull, we often get a complaint, well, there's no green space, but there's actually more than there is anywhere else. It's a perception of it. And I mean, if I might just quote an example, one issue that we have, I mean, Birmingham is inevitably going to be heavily affected because of, the density of population. But we in Solihull and others are being asked to provide housing needs for the region. So question mark, do we use land for housing or do we use it for green space? You can't, this is a what interventions are possible issue here, which is why right at the beginning I said, this should, the thinking to green space, one of the prime considerations, certainly I'm going to be campaigning for, is a more structural approach to green space in development. And I've got a couple of speakers now, which are top of this. Mark Liddeth.
Thanks, Councillor Courts. Yeah, just a couple of comments and just observations, and I think some support, Alex. So thank you very much for that. One of the things we've been doing in the Environment Agency recently is looking at water infrastructure for a sustainable economy, and been working with partners around how water plays that part. So it's interesting around the presentation you've given about green infrastructure. So I think there's some synergies that we can possibly look at there. So what I'll do, Alex, is I'll get in contact with you after this and put you in contact with my lead officer, who's been working with the Black Country Consortium and the Black Country LEP around water infrastructure work there, because I think there's some definite links that we can make between blue infrastructure and green infrastructure as well. And then just the other point,
an obvious thing.
yeah. The other just thing I just want to mention, it must be my month of joining boards. So obviously this is my first board meeting here, but I was also at a board meeting earlier in the week under the Birmingham Open Spaces Forum and a project they're running called the Future Park Accelerators. And I just wanted, and again, I haven't seen it in the paper, but there's obviously some fantastic work that's going on under that board and that project. And obviously, I think there's definite links between what you've discussed and what they're trying to achieve. And I just want to make sure that conversations are happening with the work that you're doing and what we're looking to do here with that project.
Okay, great. Do you want to respond to that, Alex?
Yeah, sure. If I can quickly respond, otherwise I'll forget all the different points. Sorry. So yeah, completely agree that the blue spaces is an omission from this at the moment. We've done a bit of work on that in other projects we've done in coastal areas, but I have to admit I sort of passed the buck on that one in this project. But I think as it was a relatively small scoping study, but as a next development, absolutely critical to do that because the well-being links to blue spaces are very much there. We are in contact with the Future Parks Accelerator team. In fact, I think that there could be a really good synergy between this piece of work and what they're doing, which includes two key components we spoke about with them. One being the kind of governance aspect, which links to the previous point about conflicts with developments, housing developments, and things like that. They've been doing a lot of detailed work on that area to understand how those conflicts can be addressed and how by working across different sort of sectors, if you like, of the council, different groupings in the council with different aims, health, climate, environment, inequalities, and the like, we can still address green space issues while meeting housing needs. The other thing that they're doing on the Future Parks Accelerator, which I think is interesting, is looking to develop a kind of more qualitative, place-based needs assessment. So, if we were to, take our kind of very top-down approach and say, right, we're here in Coventry, we think there's an issue here, and in the sort of northeast where there's high deprivation, and we then need a process by which we can go into that local area and do a needs-based assessment to understand, not to make too many judgments from this top-down approach, and understand what's going on locally. So they're developing stuff there, which I think could dovetail really nicely with this.
Okay. We're at 11 o'clock and I've got 4 other people, so I want to bring other speakers in.
Yeah, okay, sorry, go ahead.
Maria, first of all.
Yeah, thank you, Ian. A number of things actually. First, with the initial survey information, I'd be curious to find out what was the scope of that survey and who was actually surveyed as to whether people had gone to green spaces. The second would be I'd query the map of Sandwell that says about the green spaces, where it says they're all incidental green spaces, which I found quite confusing whether that was correct. We've actually got 14 green flags for our green space, so I don't think they're incidental. The other thing is, as you say, you don't want to see problems. You want to see the resolutions, and I think that possibly one of the ways forward is some land is so contaminated, and I know we've got the fund for decontamination of land, but some land is so contaminated that we can't use it for building land. I would suggest that we make every effort to make those spaces that we find too difficult to build on into green space. So that we're retrieving some land that's just rubbish land and making it useful green space. Sandwell is only 5 miles across, which is quite a small borough compared to some of the others, I think. And so I think that we have got a couple of areas, I think it's Wednesbury and Albury, I'm guessing, that have perhaps got less green space, and we need to concentrate on those areas. But I think if we could utilise some of these difficult to build on areas and make those greener, that may help, because inevitably the more building we need to do, we will have to utilise some green space.
Yeah. Okay, I'm going to go through, I'm on to Wazim next.
Thanks, Ian. I was going to make 3 points. One's definitely been covered. One was the Future Parks Accelerator work that we're doing in Birmingham, which is quite an innovative project. And I think there's definitely need for some conversations there. Secondly, utilising the canals, the canals right across the combined authority areas. I was at an event yesterday where or a photo shoot yesterday where a stretch of canal was given green flag status. So it's really important how we utilise the green and blue space on our canal towpaths. And the final point I'd like to make is the chair touched upon the density in Birmingham, and he's absolutely right. About 15 years ago, before I was a councillor here in Lascelles, where I'm the local member, which is one of the most densely populated areas in Birmingham, there was something called the Lascelles Newtown Aston Area Action Plan that was adopted, which is a policy document. And within that, there was a clear area which said that we have to preserve the green space that we've got left, the very small green space that we've got left. And I think that policy has protected the limited green space that we've got in these small neighbourhoods, densely populated neighbourhoods. So I think looking at something like that and the lessons to be learned around that, and how that can be adopted in other similar areas will be a good piece of work I think we should link into. Thank you.
Totally agree with that. Peter Fowler?
Thank you, Ian. Would certainly welcome and thank Maria for you talking about the contamination. Thank you, Maria. And likewise with Wazim with the subdivision parts of canals. We have mentioned a number of times, I think, on the CA and the route to zero about ensuring that when planning building houses is that when we have the heading under environment, it talks about green space as well as EV, heating, etc. So that's one thing that we ought to, throughout the West Midlands Combined Authority, to ensure that all planning departments, when they're looking at the at a building application that's been put forward, to ensure that there are green spaces in with that planning application. And I know that builders are quite concerned about not doing that because it's another house or two that they could gain profit on. But it is about the community as well. And Wazim made a very good point, I thought, that I'd actually written down here next to planning, I'd put community and action plans. So there's another area that we work with the community and what action plans they may have as well to go with any planning that may be coming forward in an area. Thank you.
Thank you, Peter. And I'm going to come on to finally to Andy, but we're talking about people a lot here, but there is a biodiversity element to this, and this will segue very nicely into what Catherine Moore is going to talk about, I suspect, in a minute. Andy, Mac.
Yes, thank you. I was going to talk about also the biodiversity. I know we take a slight issue. We want this rubbish land needs to be made into usable green space. I walked through something what's called rubbish land in Wolverhampton in the summer, and it was a beacon of biodiversity and really some rare plants, some rare different types of birds, different types of stuff. So we must always cherish any land and any biodiversity, and that should be part of the strategy as well, with the educational aspect to that, so people know and are educated in the wide range of nature, not just green grass and nice trees. Second point is connectivity, and this is so important. You mentioned it. We must also connect people to large green spaces like the forest we're trying to plant, so people can go and travel in a green manner to other green spaces. The connectivity through wildlife ways to green spaces is important. And the final thing is about integration and mindset. I was at an EA meeting this week, and the Environmental Agency are now going to use natural capital for flood prevention. That means they might put natural barriers to prevent a river flooding during a rainfall, to hold back the river, hold back the thing. And they're saying is when we do natural capital, we can actually put a cycle lane in alongside a river or do that. And that's where we just need to think more globally. I used to live in Coventry, and Coventry has a river right through the centre of it. And it only shows its face by the cathedral for about 20 metres before it continues underground to Pull Meadow. That attitude needs to stop. We need to start embracing rivers and spaces. And wouldn't Coventry be a lot better if there was a nice river going right through it with some natural green space that people could walk through and make it more enjoyable? So that's all I have to say. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, I mean, thanks, Andy. I mean, what's come clear from all of this is the ideas that are emerging. So what I'm going to suggest, you know, and this doesn't need a big long report, but what I'd quite like to see is a list of possible actions and solutions, because several of the speakers here have already suggested those, and I wondered whether we could just collate a list to come back to for the next meeting, because I you know, we've highlighted a very important issue here. What I want to see are the actions and solutions moving forward. Individuals, not necessarily what the CA is doing, but this is back to what we said earlier about loads of people have good ideas and we need to broadcast them. Could we do that in a fairly simple manner? I would welcome it.
Yes, yeah, we'll do that.
Great stuff. I heard you bark in reply. Right. I am going to move on. I'm a bit behind now. I'm going to move to West Midlands National Park, and I have a feeling Catherine's going to come up with some ideas too. And this is a presentation that Catherine Moore and Robin Daniels are going to present. So I can't see you at the moment. Yes, you've just appeared on the screen. So I'm going to hand over to you, Catherine, to manage the next few minutes.
Okay. Hang on a minute. Can you? Sorry. Oh dear, this is always so terrifying. Are you there?
Yes.
Oh, good.
And we can hear you. We can see you, and we had a brief glimpse of a slide.
Catherine.
Sorry. Oh dear, it's so. I hate this technology. God.
Do well. Keep going.
Right, let me find it again. I've just closed the machine, closed it down. So.
Catherine,
Right.
whilst you're doing that, I think what would help is because we don't have masses of time, is if you could send around to the participants here some info. It may not be the presentation, but
Yes, I will do.
Oh,
I think
yeah.
I think it should work now.
Yeah, there we go.
Can you see it? Yeah. Okay, great. So thank you very much for inviting us to come here. I won't go through these in a lot of detail, but the West, actually this slide is important because this is where I grew up, and I'll return to that later. The West Midlands National Park Lab, Robin and I are part of that lab. It's the research office for the West Midlands National Park. We have an advisory board, a foundation, and a West Midlands National Park Foundation, and a number of MOUs with a number of organisations, including the West Midlands Combined Authority. I want to talk about landscape as culture and identity, as well as the blue stuff, the green stuff, and the grey stuff. So it is very much who you are. If you think about where you grew up and how much that shapes you, that's what we mean in the West Midlands National Park by landscape. It's the ideas, the experience you have, and that relationship that you have with your landscape, with your territory, is important in communities all over the world, whether it's in Salford or Thurrock or Birmingham, Coventry, Enfield, wherever. The other thing I want to say to start with is that COVID has changed everything, because we can't just carry on in the same way as we've been doing for the last 70 years or so if we want to achieve this levelling up, if we want to prepare communities, towns and cities for future pandemics. And one of the things that I've heard, again, I find it quite strange, is that people still think that if we sort out all the major economic decisions, then we can add environment onto that. But what COVID has shown us is that this approach has exacerbated rather than address matters of environmental and spatial justice, health and deprivation. It has not improved air quality or created thriving communities, and it's not made us resilient in terms of agriculture, nature, climate change, and I don't think it's even created a sense of place. So the National Park is based on a new idea of landscape. It's an economic, long-term proposal that brings together the environment, citizens, businesses, NGOs and the public sector around a region-wide spatial vision. And I think it's really important for all of you because it will help us compete in the global battle for talent. It'll help us support a green recovery, create thriving and healthy communities, and transform the West Midlands into the healthiest region in the UK. And really what it's about is putting quality of life and the environment at the top of the political agenda, because this is increasingly what we hear that people want, that voters want. It's important to say what it isn't. The National Park is not a traditional national park, it's a new kind of urban national park. It brings the national park idea to urban populations rather than expecting them to travel out. It's about transformation as much as conservation and preservation, and it involves working with businesses as much as schools and local communities. And it aims to gather, just what you've been talking about, Councillor Courts, on a collaborative basis, a host of existing initiatives and strategies and projects from the water companies, wildlife trusts, housing, transport, etc., to create something that's more than the sum of its parts. Now, these guys, they shaped through their imagination the West Midlands, and there's this whole idea of civic pride. And I just wanted to ask, so what's our idea of progress today? We've heard a lot about the issues. One of the key ones I want to focus on is the identity crisis, which, despite all the work that's been done over the last few years, we've recently had comments like, how am I going to encourage 600 people to come and live in Wolverhampton? Why would I want to live in Birmingham? It's so ugly. Coming to the Midlands is tantamount to coming from nowhere in particular. Do you know you have to deal with the Birmingham factor if people want to come and live here? So I think one of the key reasons for that is that the landscape has become a blind spot in many regional economic strategies. And I think we should try and make sure that that actually changes. We completely focus on buildings and roads. As we've seen, there are huge spatial issues to do with multiple deprivation indices that actually, in this early study that I did, really coagulate around major infrastructure projects in the region. And the metrics hand this started out. We've got problems of water security. If Wales now, where's all our water comes from this pipe from Wales. We've got these big issues that we know, the global issues that we've mentioned, flooding, rapid urbanisation. I know it's not going to look like that, but the depletion of natural resources, forest deforestation, loss of biodiversity, soil exhaustion. Where are we going to get the food from if we keep building on agricultural land? And something that's really significant here in Birmingham is the air pollution and what we're going to do about that. So, and as mentioned, the extraordinary legacy of the Industrial Revolution and the actual contamination that's there. But really, I think it's this silo-driven approach that is creating the really difficult problem. We've got simplistic and outmoded financial models and growth targets. And we've got this idea that landscape is just about hiding poor spatial decision making. There's a lack of integrated thinking, a sectoral approach. And I think in the end, this creates greater expense and impoverished environments and poor quality of life for many communities. And the reason why the West Midlands National Park has gathered so much attention is because people are looking for inspiration and new ideas. And that's, I think, what we can do. So rather than carrying on with business as normal, we want to develop a new way of thinking and working. It's relevant to a number of different work streams and strategies across the West Midlands Combined Authority. We want to work with you to understand how the principles and the ethos of the West Midlands National Park can inform your thinking, be interpreted and integrated into those plans and strategies. The opportunities are incredible. The Black Country Geopark, the Coventry City of Culture, Birmingham 22, the Commonwealth Games, the arrival of HS2 eventually. We've got a great track record in that the Black Country Urban Park study, which was put together in 2005, is continuing it's embedded in the Black Country core strategy. And in fact, we've been asked to look at how it might put a fresh pair of eyes on the Black Country plan that's currently being developed. And it's this way of seeing things as a whole rather than into different types of categories, such as the Black Country's Garden City, covering 1,500 hectares, thinking about the Black Country as a home for nature, not just in isolated sites within it, but the whole place. Why don't we think of the whole region as a biophilic region, building on Birmingham's biophilic status? And I think we should become a leading region for phytoremediation for brownfield sites and contaminated land. We've got precedents since I was involved in Salford, where we could not believe that Salford Quays would become a new water quarter. We all laughed at it, but it has. It took 25 years. We've been inspired by the Ruhr region, where you have more than 100 projects across 17 cities, and this huge effort to transform a post-industrial site into one of the top regional top tourist destinations for the region. We could do this. Why is it a good thing? It's counterintuitive because we have a poor perception, but it's changing perceptions of the region at a highest level. It will attract more investment and funding. It's meeting the demand to do things differently that we really is tangible given post the COVID pandemic rather. It's giving us the opportunity to seriously look at different models of investment and governance, which is why we're working with the Future Parks Accelerator and within the lab. And it's a way to integrate and bring together all these different strategies. West Midlands 2041, brownfield first housing, public service reform, environment, health and wellbeing, and HS2. So the next steps, we've got an accreditation. We're developing accreditation criteria. Absolutely. What have we got here? What's here now? How can we bring in these different strategies to actually begin to shout about what we've got? And we also need to develop knowledge of the region. Where is all the wildlife? There are lots of little maps all over the place, but not one big map. Where's the culture? Where are the traditional land-based skills? Where do we get our food from? Where could we get it from? These are many questions. For example, the UNESCO Geopark, where is it? I know there are lots of maps, but not one map. And we're working with the OS to help to try and sort that out. What are we going to do with our city centres? Where are people going to come to? We need to have a major tourist destination to help to save the city centres in Birmingham, for example. And then if we look at the ring parks, the ring park idea, looking at the canals and the rivers and the streams rather than the roads, then we can begin to build a strategy for interconnected routes going across the city, but also across the region, so that each city could have a city centre park, which is connected and it's interconnected with the Edwardian fringe belts, the rivers, the canals, and those become the locusts for development. So we can have networks going from Coventry, Solihull to Birmingham and Wolverhampton, connecting across the ring parks, the canals and the rivers. We could become a region of 1,000 parks and squares. We need to, as Jackie said, value our cultural heritage. The rivers are, well, I'm sorry, Mark, but the rivers are, why can't we become a region of invisible rivers, from a region of invisible rivers to a region of 1,000 lakes and streams? Now, I know I'm slightly running out of time now. Rainwater pools and miles of sustainable urban drainage, 1,000 miles of cycleways and footpaths. It's great to see the emergency Birmingham transport plan beginning to prioritise cyclists and pedestrians over cars. We really are keen to develop a business case that looks in the long term, looking at different economic models, especially donors economics, and different types of governance. So it's not just muscling each other out of the way, but really sharing the risks, the costs and the benefits, and helping you to achieve the ambitions of the 2041 climate action, all these different things that we've been asked to comment on already from different authorities, to shape the long-term environmental, social and economic transformation of the region. And to sum up, we want it to be the better, healthier place in which to live. So people want to come and live here, not because they have no choice. Their kids want to come and live here, their children, grandchildren want to come and live here. And we want to work with you to help to make this a reality. Gosh. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. That's tremendous. You did incredibly well, actually, in bringing that all together in a short space of time. I mean, you and I had a discussion on this last week, and I mean, it's blindingly obvious that I'm going to be a fan of the sort of holistic approach to environment that you are representing. My question is, well, it's not a question, but my concern in many ways is that you've adopted a name which is striking in national terms, but it inevitably links you to most ideas of national park, which is planning, restriction, beauty. And, I just think, is there an issue of branding here that needs a little bit of thinking about?
Yes, and actually it deliberately is counterintuitive. We could have said we're going to have a regional park, but actually I don't think that would have raised many eyebrows. I know that the national park, we're not actually asking for the resources to set up a national park through Parliament, which is what normally takes. The South Downs, I think, took 25 years to set it up. We're not asking for the resources for the infrastructure of legislation and regulations that national parks have. I don't think we need that. I think we need to adopt the approach that they did in the Ruhr, which is to begin to act in a different way and to say, this is the West Midlands National Park. It would not have gained the attention, I don't think, that it has done. And it wouldn't have been applauded by the National Parks Review that Julian Glover carried out had we called it a regional park. And I think it also is something it really seems to speak to people who really want to have that sense of confidence and optimism in the region, and to think that we could be part of a national park has a transformative effect on the people that we're talking to.
Yeah, no, I mean, I wasn't in any way suggesting calling it a regional park. I was just looking for, and frankly, whilst I've been scribbling down stuff here like the new national park or urban park, all of these things. But the big issue here is you have a number of local authorities around the table. I mean, I get a bit. I'll speak for Andy, who might want to speak. I'm just a bit hurt because what we have done with our own project, Greening the Grey Wildlife Ways, is exactly what you are suggesting, and indeed the suggestion I made earlier on about development needs to incorporate green infrastructure, and it's that sort of thinking which we need across the board.
Yeah.
I'm just going to ask Wazim now, and then Ian. I'm going to get some speakers, and then you can come back.
Okay.
Thank you, Ian. Can I start by saying thank you to Catherine and Robin for briefing me a few weeks back on what is a hugely exciting project. And I know you've been having conversations with the cabinet colleagues of mine in Birmingham and senior officers who are all expressing, deep excitement about the potential of this project and how this brings together different facets, both in terms of climate change, air quality, sustainable growth. There's all sorts, better connectivity. There's all sorts that come together. And I'm somebody who's particularly keen on improving tree canopy cover, in particular in some of the more deprived areas in Birmingham, and it's how we can also build that into this too. I'm also really excited about the rings and how we connect blue and green space, not just in Birmingham but across the combined authority area. I think that is quite a dynamic way of improving connectivity and cohesion across the region too, and that will no doubt create massive opportunities, not just for Birmingham but for the region as a whole. So I'm particularly excited about this. I'm really pleased we've got obviously an academic partner in BCU via Catherine and Robin who are leading on this. So Birmingham is fully engaged and really excited about this. So no question, just a comment of support from you, Chair. Thank you.
That's great, Wazim. We're all on the same page here. And I mean, what I think this is brilliant. I mean, the work that your council and my council have done on the River Cole, for instance, and want to do more in terms of connecting up those. This brings together the whole thinking of collaboration in the West Midlands, which, as you say, is just downright exciting. Ian Kettle.
Thank you, Chairman. Catherine, a very good report.
Thank you.
What's interesting, as far as I'm concerned, is that somehow we often create huge tracts of land covered with trees. And I walk in Worcestershire and South Staffs and Shropshire on a weekly basis. We often create these vast tracts of wooded land that are inert to the individual. And I think a lesson we could learn from Eastern Europe, where very often fruit-producing trees are intermixed with our forest. So winemakers and people could use the countryside for other reasons other than just exercise. And I think if we aren't careful, we can recreate these monsters. We pass some Wellingtonians or some giant redwoods occasionally, and they're brilliant. But when you go through considerable, vast areas of conifer plantations, very often there's very little interest for the individual. So I think we've got to look at a broader biodiversity in the kind of trees we plant, and we've got to put a bit more interest in there, Ian. But yeah, Kath, I thought that was a very good report. Thank you very much, Ian.
No, that's great. We're all singing the same hymn sheet here. Peter?
Thank you, Ian. I would certainly agree with what Ian said about the trees and biodiversity. Very much welcome that. And so you mentioned again, and I'm so pleased you did, about this thing now, collaborating and collating all the work with the CA and the local authorities. So I noticed, Catherine, your great presentation there. The first one I saw was Canals and River Trust, and so many other people. It's, again, they're all doing so many different things, and it's all about that connectivity on all aspects of how you're getting to different places, but also on what people are doing. And as I mentioned again yesterday at the Route to Zero, and again today, it's about ensuring that we are not duplicating, but enhancing on what people, on what work people have already done, because that's the pleasure that we all have, is saying, look, all this work these people have done, let's build on what they've done and bring it together. And the other thing is, I looked at and noticed linking with things on our doorstep as well. For example, in Birmingham, we do have Aston Hall and many other places, and it's all connecting with those as well, because there are some great green spaces as well. And notice even bizarre places like Aston Reservoir, and we've got the River Tame going right next door to it. And there's so many great avenues that we can take this forward, Chair. It's a tremendous, very exciting for me as well.
Yeah, it is. It really is. Catherine, I think what I'd like to sort of arrive at is a means of going forward. And I think, we've got the tremendous, enthusiasm for everybody, as I expected. But what I want to see is how we can take some of these ideas forward in a tangible way. We don't need to do that now. But, you know, this whole idea, you know, you've mentioned one or two really important things, like you mentioned tourism, you mentioned, the Birmingham thing. You know, when I came to was going to work in the Midlands, I from the southeast, I was going to live somewhere near Warwick. I ended up in Solihull. But and what did I get? Warwick, that's Birmingham, isn't it? You know, and you think, well, actually, Birmingham's a great. Just look at Birmingham now. You know, so it's image creating. We need some key stuff we can do to change perception. And you know, I'm going to invite Maria. Would like to speak now. And I know the green flag parks you got, Maria. There's some tremendous stuff. I mean, we got a number as well. Maria.
You're muted.
You're muted, Maria.
Oh.
Takes a minute to react sometimes, these things. You're off. Yep.
Try now. Is it working now?
Yes.
You're on.
Am I on now?
Yeah.
Oh, cool. That just wouldn't work then. Yeah, I think one of the things is we're all doing lots of things in our own areas singularly. I mean, like we're planting 500 trees for every child that starts school, and I've been doing that last year, and we will continue to do that this year. And they're all native trees. We're doing a cycle lane that you can go all the way from Cannock all the way through Sandwell, through the Sandwell Valley into Birmingham, and to the Aquatic Centre and to the games. I think we need to have a map of all the stuff that we are doing and then expand from that, if that's possible.
Maria, you're saying what we said earlier, isn't it? It's so important we all show off and get credit for the individual things that are being done and learn from. And together, you know, we've got a great story to tell. I just, last word, Catherine, I think you and I probably need another conversation, but over to you, Catherine, for a minute.
Well, first of all, I really didn't want to hurt you in any way. And I went through those slides so quickly, but actually that's exactly what we need to do. Find out what's going on, map it, find out all these great initiatives that are happening, so that and badge them through the accreditation process as part of the West Midlands National Park. And it's not just the green initiatives that are happening, it's also the building initiatives. So we've been approached by developers saying, we want this to be the first development for in the West Midlands National Park. And so we've said, if it's good enough, yes. And so we can actually begin to really put pressure on, because they know that if they build to a better standard, if they can be badged as the West Midlands National Park, they will put more money into the development, and then they'll get a better return on the money, and then we begin to push the cycle up. And so I think it's the whole and that's what they've been pioneering in the Black Country through the Garden City. And so I think there are all these things that we do need to show off about it. We really do.
Okay, that's great. So we'll progress this, but I think we need a more detail. We'll need to have a focus and just see what the actions are taking this forward. So
thank you.
That's great stuff. I'm going to move on swiftly. I'm now 10 minutes behind, so everybody note that. Virtual forests. I got Callum from the WMCA environmental team, who's going to provide a forest full of biodiversity instead of boring loads of firs like they get in some places. I think referring to East Europe, I don't know what. Callum.
Thank you, Councillor Courts. Good morning, everybody. I'll just share my screen to get the virtual forest site up. And can you see that?
Yes.
Yes, thank you. So the first iteration of our virtual forest, you may recall, was launched earlier this year, I think in January. And the site itself was functional at best. Now, just a reminder of what the virtual forest is. It's essentially a platform for recording all the tree planting activity that's going on across the West Midlands region. As Jackie mentioned earlier, we have a target of 4 million trees to be planted in the next 15 years. And it's really important to be able to quantify how well we're doing against that target. And that is what this virtual forest platform aims to do. So over the summer, we've been working with other organisations, so local authorities, local and national charities such as the Woodland Trust, to develop this new site that you see before you. And I'll very briefly give you an overview of the site, its functionality, and where we hope to go in future with this project. So you'll see, first of all, as I scroll down this page, you can go straight to register your tree here. You have a total of trees planted. That is the amount that were planted earlier this year. And I will come on to talk about that a little bit more in a moment. And a few steps for getting involved. Now, in terms of getting involved, and I'll just highlight the drop-down box here, we really want this to be something that can be used by everybody, as well as the stakeholder groups. So that is your local tree planting charities and local authorities who already have significant tree planting programs. We will really want to encourage local residents to get involved, be that planting a tree in their own garden or joining an organised tree planting event. Obviously, this year that's unlikely to happen with the COVID restrictions, but in future, that's the kind of connectivity we really hope to be able to achieve. But we hope to join up with groups, parish councils, for example, and schools. These are organisations that are eligible to apply for tree packs from the Woodland Trust. Corporates who may well want to get involved in tree planting themselves or sponsor trees as part of carbon offsetting. Landowners and farmers. And then we provide some guidance and advice, because we do want to make sure that if you're planting a tree in your own garden, for example, that you're doing it with the correct knowledge. I won't run through how you register a tree, but I'll just give you an overview of what this page looks like. And you'll note when this loads, there we are, that this covers a wider area than just the 7 core WMCA members. So it covers the non-constituent members and the 3 local enterprise partnerships. So it's a wider area than just the 7. And you can see the functionalities on the right here. So if you're just planting a single tree, you can drop that on the map. If you are planting an area of hedgerow, you can draw a line with that to identify that. And then if you're planting an area of new woodland, you can mark that on with the area of trees. Now, the Our Progress page is where we'll be measuring the important bit, which is how well we're doing. And this sort of leads on nicely to one of the asks that I've got to members, and that is that one of the things we really want to encourage is for people to retrospectively add any trees they planted earlier this year. So we've got about 1,700 trees that have already been registered. Obviously, that's a slightly lower number than we'd hoped for, but we did suffer from, first of all, some flooding and then COVID, and the tree planting season finishes in March. So it was curtailed somewhat, and I'm sure that that will be a challenge that we have this year as well. But it also will give us information about how well different organisations are doing. So it will ask you if you're planting a tree on behalf of an organisation, such as a local authority or a tree wardens group. And that information would be shown in this trees planted by organisation here. So you can check it against your own targets if you have them. You can see the types of tree that are planted, although we are trying to encourage mixes of species. So if you're planting a hedge, for example, we may be encouraged that we plant a hedge that is good for berries and nuts, not only for wildlife, but also for people to go and pick blackberries and things like that. And at the bottom left here, we have a section which will display information about why people are planting trees, to try and get into a little bit of detail about what people are planting trees for, be that for improvements to biodiversity, as a way of offsetting carbon emissions. And a lot of people may have multiple reasons for doing this, but we're trying to pinpoint what their main reason would be. And on this map, you can zoom in and see where the activity's taken place. Finally, we've got our partners page, and this is not yet complete. So if your organisation is missing from this list here, then please do send me an email. I'll put that in the chat at the end of this a little bit. And that is a very, very quick overview of the page. And one of the things that we will be looking for when the site goes live, which will be very shortly, is to get the organisation, the stakeholders, to retrospectively add their trees. And we will launch this more publicly during Tree Week, which is the very end of November and the start of December. And so hopefully there'll be a lot of activity going on around the area, around the region during that period. And we'll be working collectively and collaboratively to crowd plant as many trees as we can so we can reach our target.
Okay.
I'm happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much. It's very good. I've got Peter Feller wanted to speak. I mean, what's looking at the map, there's quite obviously big gaps there, because I don't believe that we've only planted 1,600 trees. I know in Solihull, I think we've got a target of about 35,000 for this year. Is it 25 or 35,000? And that's just council driven activity. So it's just a matter of ownership, really. I mean, it would be nice if everybody put stuff in to show as a region what we can do. Peter.
Yes, Callum, good morning. First of all, in the words of Strictly Come Dancing, brilliant, absolutely brilliant. I was so excited when I saw that, and I'm thinking of your 4 million trees, like Ian. I wrote down a number of things. First of all, and we'll support what Wazim has been looking for. You mentioned about, firstly in Birmingham, of course, and I'm sure combined authority wide, about more trees in deprived areas. Because that's one thing that I know Wazim has been calling for, and I would certainly support on that. We have a lot of trees in Harborne, where I'm a member for, but I know in other deprived areas, Wazim has been calling for that. So I very much welcome what he's asking for. And yes, and likewise, residents in my area, and I'm sure others have been asking if we can have more trees. And you put in there the reason for it. I'd like to see more trees, but the right trees in the right places, and of course to help with the carbon. And great to see that you've got so many partners involved. And I noted that when you talked about where we can plant trees, and I'm sure for those areas that have got them, those are sort of things that we can communicate through our ward forums. I know our parks manager in Harborne is working on a plan already, so communicating with those to see how they can get more trees into your virtual forest, and then looking forward to that tree week. So if we can communicate with people before that, that will give us some idea of how we can build on that. But I know there's a lot of people that are asking, can we have more trees? And this is an excellent vehicle to take that forward. Thank you, Callum. Thank you, Ian.
I'd just like to ask a question, actually, in terms of the partners, because you know, I was on a call with a developer yesterday who had quite strong environmental credentials. He was telling us about something he was doing, and they have a very good sustainability thing. But and also a supermarket phoned me basically because they wanted to do a development, but as a ward member, they were trying to curry favour. But you know, my question back to you is, well, what are you doing for the local community? And by the way, you know, what about, you know, a few trees from you? And I actually mentioned that. Should we not be signing up? But, you know, if you want development, what's your tree credentials? OK. Secondly, we need private landowners involved in this. You know, you'd be surprised how you can actually put a few extras in. I know when I did my woodland locally, I was told by the you know, relevant officers, you can't cover it all with trees. You need a variety of stuff, and you need grasslands and stuff for the biodiversity. But the fact is, we need to get sort of a bit of crowd enthusiasm here. You know, you've got a garden. Could you fit in an apple tree? You know, anyway, a few things I tossed in there. Callum?
Just add one more thing, if I may.
Sorry,
Callum.
Peter.
Yeah, sorry, Ian, I meant to mention, not name dropping here, but I happened to meet Hilary McGrady, who's the Director General of the National Trust. And I mentioned they were talking about at the time pocket parks, etc. And I said it would be great if regionally the National Trust could have a look at Birmingham and the West Midlands and give us your promotion and support. And she was very interested in taking that forward, Ian. So, if that would help.
Got another name then.
It was quite said that she would love to have a chat with us and see how she can support and promote what we're doing here in the West Midlands. Thank you.
Okay. Callum?
Yeah. Yes, Councillor Courts, you mentioned about private landowners, and that is one area that we're really keen to work with, and we've been quite fortunate that the Woodland Trust are helping us on this. They have a couple of initiatives, More Hedges and More Trees, the names of them, and they essentially part fund these schemes and projects on farmland, and they have agreed to ensure that any trees that are planted through that scheme will be registered through this site. So there is work ongoing with landowners on that, and I think that one thing is just to encourage a bit more activity, because you don't have to take significant areas of land out of production if you want to plant extra hedges, because a lot of this will just be reinstatement of previously grubbed out hedgerows from the post-war period. So we're really keen to work with that and work with landowners on that, and obviously with the Woodland Trust's help, that should be really good.
Fantastic. Really great program. I look to see the old ticker-tocker on the numbers keep going up, so we'll be interested in that. I've got no more speakers, so I'm going to move on, if that's okay with everybody. Amazingly, 11:45 are almost to time now, and now we've got Richard Rees from the WMCA environmental team with a program overview. Richard, are you there somewhere?
I am, Councillor Courts, thank you. I was expecting Jodie Townsend to be giving an update on something for the next item.
I missed something.
Yeah, Chair, item number 7 you need to...
oh, my God. Well done. Well done. Jodie.
Hello.
Apologies.
No problem. I'll do my best here. You have to excuse me. I'm having some IT issues, so I'm doing this slightly blind. I can't open any papers at the moment, but I've managed to get Teams working, so that's all good. I came to you previously in regard to discussion on terms of reference and the implications of the development of the single assurance framework. Now, the CA board unanimously adopted the new assurance framework document back at the end of July. As previously set out to you, that has a number of implications for all our thematic boards. We're looking for all thematic boards of the CA to undertake 4 key roles. That is to play a role in developing and approving the relevant portfolio annual business plan, which then obviously feed into those objectives that each portfolio is looking to deliver in that upcoming year. To provide oversight of the relevant portfolio project pipeline. Now, this is something we're looking for every portfolio to develop, which will be a document that will detail all projects that are either in the bid phase, the development phase, or the delivery phase, and have some key information regarding each of those projects on that document, such as what stage it's at, if it's in development in regard to the business case, if it's in the approval stage, where it's at, what considerations are underway, what out of sponsor directorate appraisal is underway, and what's the outcome of that, for example. The third of those is to advise on major policy changes in that portfolio, and I believe in the number of thematic boards are already undertaking that function. And then the final one is to performance management of portfolio project delivery. So this would be about utilising the project pipeline I referred to earlier, and seeing what each of those projects are looking to deliver and checking whether they are delivering them as expected and in line with the standards of the organisation set out in our assurance framework. In addition to those single assurance framework implications for thematic boards, we've also done a bit of work around trying to develop a consistent approach and application of standards in regard to how our thematic boards operate, and that should also be set out in the paper before you. That impacts things around membership and supporting the portfolio lead in particular, and making sure that all thematic boards are fulfilling that role in supporting that portfolio lead. And also, as I just referred to there, making sure that we take on board any membership requests from each thematic board, such as Environment Agency, for example, being a member of this body, Energy Capital, for example, again, being another one. Anyway, all of this work, just getting to the end of it, has resulted in a draft terms of reference being developed, which you should hopefully have before you, and some reassurance. It's obviously very consistent and very familiar to all the other terms of references being developed and approved by other thematic boards, but hopefully will reflect your specific portfolio requirements and elements, as well as the other ones I've outlined. If you have any questions in regards to that, happy to try and answer them, or any other questions that may be relevant to the assurance framework, again, happy to try and answer them.
I mean, what we've been asked to do is to consider the framework requirements for thematic boards, portfolio improvements, and amended terms of reference. It seems to me that this is a performance, making sure that I, as chairman, we as a board, and I guess those supporting us are doing their jobs properly. Probably no bad thing to have that, but it's sort of putting us on our toes a little bit. I've got no speakers on that. Ed, do you want to come in to keep us on the tracks?
Simply to say that, yes, simply to say that Jodie, Jackie and myself are sort of working together on this in terms of the way in which we move our West Midlands 2041 delivery programme forward. So none of this is particular news to me, and it's absolutely the kind of process that we're working towards. I think the only thing I would flag, Councillor Courts, and to the board, is that going back to our conversation about behaviour change, is that sometimes there are aspects of our work that don't very neatly sit as projects, if you see what I mean. Sometimes there are sort of more subtle ways in which we are working collaboratively with different partners, and indeed encouraging citizens and businesses to behave in particular ways. And so I think we need to remain relatively sophisticated about our kind of theory of change and mode of operation. It won't all be in neat and tidy projects and business cases. But again, I think Jodie is familiar with that challenge.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Sorry, go on, Jodie.
I was just going to add, Councillor Courts, so that's okay. Yeah, it's about obviously setting out those specific project requirements in relation to our assurance framework, but making sure that obviously there's that maturity and ability within every portfolio and directorate to utilise the documentation and produce additional information as best fits that portfolio. So where there are things that, like you said, that are more engagement, where are not specific projects, we can still incorporate information around those items to make sure that thematic boards are fully aware of them.
Do you know, Jodie, one of the things that bothers me is, I mean, we've had a great meeting. I mean, I hope everybody thinks we've had some really good stuff here, and it'll be pretty obvious I'm looking for, outcomes. That's what I do all the time, and actions and stuff, because that's what we have to do. And the reason we have to do it is I'm really concerned about the resourcing implications. I mean, environmental, to my mind, I hope everybody agrees with this, is not just about a separate strand over there. It integrates with everything that we do, underpinned by, obviously 2041, and but it integrates with every single portfolio and more. And there is such a big agenda here. It sort of worries me, how we can deal with all the things I think we all want to do. I'm actually just not asking a question. I'm just saying, we have a great agenda. I just hope, it's fine measuring stuff, but at the end of the day,
May I build on that, Councillor Courts?
Yeah.
Simply to say that again, another piece of work that we're doing with Jodie is to make sure that the West Midlands 2041 and environmental implications that we're pushing forward as a combined authority are built into every aspect of the combined authority's work. So this single assurance framework includes a whole set of guidance, and into that guidance we have now written sustainability and inclusive growth issues, so that if anybody was to be bringing forward a project, even projects that we wouldn't necessarily know about from our own directorate's perspective, they will be asked to make considerations as to their impact on 2041 and wider sustainability. So that is now embedded in this single assurance framework.
Thank you. That's great. That's just what I wanted to hear. Okay, I've got no speakers on this. So as far as I'm concerned, we're agreeing with the recommendations there. So thank you, Jodie and team, for that. And,
thank you, everyone.
Okay, my apologies. We're not on time now. We're programming mistake. And I'm going to move. I now really am going to move on to Richard Rees, unless someone tells me I got it wrong again. Richard.
Thanks, Chair. I think so. In the concluding slot now, and I'm just going to share my screen. And can you see that?
Yes.
Yes. Yeah, thank you. So this is going in some ways back to the top of the agenda when Jackie introduced the overall programme. So what we've given you in the papers at the last few pages is just a narrative of what's going on across the WM 2041 programme. And that brings in all of the different partners and people across the Combined Authority and the links through their own programmes. So it's broken down into 3 different sections, and this is from the approved paper from June, which was the programme from implementing an environmental recovery. So the 3 sections are urgent actions for 2020, the 12-month priorities, and you heard earlier about the 5-year plan. And the overall programme on a page looks like this. So it's split into the 5 themes for 2020. We've heard a lot about the nature and natural capital programme today, and the other areas are buildings, energy, transport, and circular and green economy. So I think we intend on bringing these back to you in themes at future programme boards, but we will be guided on that. And the programme pipeline that we've got there before you could be the pipeline that Jodie was just referring to. So that's one of the recommendations for approval within the papers. I wasn't going to go into the detail of each of these because that's clearly probably a full day's worth of presentations, which we don't have time for. And the particular recommendations to the board for these were to firstly get your feedback on the programme update. Secondly, to identify any particular areas of interest, so similar to what you've done with natural capital today, to link in with different projects and programmes. Thirdly, I've just mentioned to agree the scope of work. So the section 2 there and the following 5-year plan to form part of the work programme that Jodie's just referred to for the pipeline. And fourthly, to ask you how you'd like to be engaged, both individually or collectively outside of board meetings in the programme update. So as you look at the last few pages in that paper, have a look and see, are there any particular parts of the programme that you would like us to come and speak to you individually on? You've already told us today about the 5-year plan, which we will bring you together to look at the interventions and how that maps across what your authorities are already doing and how we can coordinate delivery. But are there any other sections in that programme update? So that was just the very brief update that I wanted to give, Chair, and happy to take any questions on that in the short time we've got left. You're on mute, Councillor Courts.
Just testing. I've got no hands up, no speakers hand up. This sort of you know is going to take us how we move forward. So I'd quite like if anyone, you know, we will continue with our current path. But the important thing that Richard just said was whether we need some further engagement with anybody here outside this meeting. I'm really keen that people plug into what's going on here if they wish to. No,
it's an open invitation, so do just get in touch with us once you've had a fresh look through the papers if there is anything that stands out.
I think, yeah, I don't know whether it applies to me. Because I'm not part of the board, but yeah, I'd very be interested to.
Yeah, certainly, Catherine. I mean, all stakeholders are welcome, and it's important that we put across. So just drop me a line with the particular areas that you're interested in, and we can make sure you're linked into the relevant parts of that and the stakeholders that are leading on it.
Thank you very much.
I'll put our email addresses just in the meeting chat so that if people want to follow up afterwards, you have our contact information.
Trying to be very inclusive here, Catherine, even if you're not part of the board. I've had people before speak because at the end of the day, we want a proper discussion. Okay, so I will move on to the forward plan. I have a feeling we came up during the course of this meeting. We've made some suggestions of things that we'd like feedback on, not necessarily big substantive items. But I'm looking for any other suggestions. Jackie, do you think you've got? I don't make it easy for you, but do you think you've got an idea of what we're looking for from the meeting today?
Yes. So I've got a clear idea, particularly on some of the feedback around natural capital. The next meeting's in December, and WSP will be reaching or nearing the end of their work with us. So there'll definitely be something to bring back on the 5-year plans, a substantive item for discussion. And the other item that we had in mind, people have touched on the need for wider engagement with stakeholders. We're doing quite a lot of work with business in various guises. So through a clean innovation accelerator with 5G, some work on the circular economy, and also through a business pledge that we're taking forward. So we thought that might be interesting to package up for the board as well, so you can see some of the wider engagement that we're doing too. So if people are in agreement, that's what we'll bring back, as well as some of the actions from this meeting.
Okay. All right, that seems to be going. I'd certainly like a list of people that are, stakeholders that are signing up to stuff like the virtual forestry, all of those things. I think we all want to know who's engaged. Just a list. I don't need a report or anything. So, because we meet people outside these meetings and have discussions. So, okay. So, any other business? I can't see any hands up, so I've overrun a couple of minutes. Forgive me. Thank you, all the participants.